Imagine you've just landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport. You're expecting fantasy. The France of Louis Vuitton ads. Endless café terraces. Work-life balance that makes American capitalism look like a penal colony. You think you're entering a wealthy superpower. And what I'm about to show you aren't conspiracy theories. These are official EU statistics, French government data, and OECD reports. But you're wrong. You're stepping into a country where the middle class is evaporating. The ambitious young are fleeing. And the government is sitting on a debt bomb that makes Italy look fiscally responsible. Quietly, politely, steadily going broke. The croissants are still good, but the economics are terrifying. Welcome to the reality of French decline. Here are 9 wounds no one talks about. 9 reasons France is poorer than you think. Before we dive in, a quick note. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not financial, investment, or professional advice. The situation in every country is different, and your personal circumstances matter. If you're making any major financial decisions, please consult with qualified professionals. Let's start with what happens when you finally land that dream job in Paris. Play a game with me. Imagine you're a young French professional. You did everything right. Suffered through the classes préparatoires. Got your master's degree. Speak decent English. You land a good job in a mid-sized city like Lyon or Bordeaux. You open your first paycheck €1,940. That's the .net monthly median salary in France as of 2024. Half the population earns less than that. Now compare yourself to your friend who didn't go to college. Maybe a cashier, a cleaner, an unqualified server. They're on SMIC, the salaire minimum interprofessionnel de croissance, minimum wage. As of 2024, net SMIC is around €1,400. See the problem? The gap between surviving and middle class is less than €550 per month. In America, the gap between a minimum wage worker and a median earner is massive. In France, it's a rounding error. Smicardization. That's the economist's term for when the wage ladder collapses and everyone clusters around minimum wage. Over the last 20 years, France has essentially compressed its wage structure into a pancake. Why? Because the cost of labor is so astronomical for companies. We'll get to taxes. That employers simply cannot afford to give raises. So when the government raises minimum wage to keep up with inflation, which they do aggressively, the floor rises, but the ceiling stays where it is. Result: the floor is eating the room. Decades ago, only a small percentage of French workers earned minimum wage. Today, over 17% of the workforce. Millions more are hovering just a few euros above it. Imagine the psychological toll. Study for 5 years. Take home stress. Manage a team. And take home barely more than the guy stocking shelves. Why bother working harder? Why innovate? Let that sink in. A master's degree, 5 years of university, for €500. This isn't just an economic statistic. It's a motivation killer. And speaking of motivation, if you think €1,900 goes far because healthcare is free, let me introduce you to the French real estate market. A decent studio in Paris. A box where you can touch the fridge from your bed. Costs €1,200 to €1,500 per month. Do the math. On a median salary, living in the capital is mathematically impossible without roommates or rich parents. You aren't living in Paris. You're camping in it. But wage compression is just the beginning. What happens when an entire country forgets how to build things? Drive 2 hours north of the luxury boutiques of Paris. and you enter a different world. This is the Rust Belt of France, the Hautes de France, the Grand Est, where the ghost of French industry lives. You might have an image of France as a powerhouse. Think Airbus, nuclear power plants, high-speed trains. Yes, those exist. But they're remnants of a glorious past, not indicators of a vibrant present. The brutal truth: France doesn't make things anymore. Look at the numbers. Manufacturing now accounts for barely 10% of France's GDP. Compare that to Germany, nearly double, Italy, even Poland. France de-industrialized faster and harder than almost any other Western nation. For 40 years, French policy was obsessed with the idea of a post-industrial society. The geniuses in Paris decided that factories were dirty and old-fashioned. They wanted France to become a nation of consultants, designers, luxury brand managers. They bet everything on services and tourism. They bet on becoming the museum of the world. And this isn't abstract. Meet Philippe, 54. He worked at a textile factory in Roubaix for 28 years. When it closed in 2019, moving production to Poland, Philippe became a delivery driver. His son, with a business degree, now works at the same Amazon warehouse. 3 generations of economic downgrade. That's the museum economy. Philippe's story is multiplied across millions. And the museum strategy worked. For tourists, France is the #1 tourist destination on Earth. But you can't build a superpower on waiters and tour guides. The consequences are devastating. When you lose factories, you lose the high-paying blue-collar jobs that sustain the middle class in rural areas. When those jobs go to Poland or China, towns die. The bakery closes, the school shrinks, the doctor retires and isn't replaced. This is the fuel for the political rage you see on the news. When you see the yellow vests, the gilets jaunes, burning toll booths, they aren't doing it because they hate Macron or love violence. They're doing it because they live in these peripheral ghost towns, where the only economic activity left is a supermarket and an Amazon warehouse. They are casualties of the museum economy. While Paris sells €3,000 handbags to American tourists, the rest of the country is fighting over crumbs. And here's the kicker. During the COVID pandemic, France realized in panic that it didn't even have the capacity to manufacture paracetamol. The country that invented the vaccine. Pasta. Anyone. Had to be, e.g. India and China, for basic painkillers. That's the reality of a country that forgot how to build. But even museums need to pay their bills. And France has been paying with a credit card for 50 years. Let's talk about the national credit card. You might hear about the US debt crisis a lot, but here's the difference. America has a printing press and the world's reserve currency. France does not. France uses the euro. It cannot print its way out of trouble. It relies on the kindness of strangers. Specifically, bond markets and German patience. In 2024, France's public debt hit 113% of GDP. To put that in perspective, the Maastricht criteria, the EU's own rules that France helped write, say debt should be under 60% of GDP. France hasn't seen 60% since the internet was invented. Here's a fun, terrifying fact. France has not passed a balanced government budget since 1974. For 50 years, half a century, the French government has spent more than it earned. Every single year. Left-wing governments, right-wing governments, centrists, doesn't matter. The addiction to spending is bipartisan. You cannot make this stuff up. 50 years. That's not a policy. It's a religion. So where does the money go? Not infrastructure. The bridges are crumbling. not military. They're relying on NATO. It's going into social protection. France spends a staggering 32 to 34% of GDP on social spending. That's the highest in the world. Higher than Sweden. Higher than Denmark. A welfare state on steroids. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to have a safety net. Great that no one dies in the street from lack of insulin. But this level of spending is mathematically unsustainable when the economy isn't growing. You're paying for a Rolls-Royce welfare state with a Peugeot economy. And the bill is coming due. In 2024, interest payments on French debt alone became one of the largest budget items. And at current rates, France is projected to spend more paying off past mistakes than educating future children. Think about that. If that doesn't scream poorer than you think, I don't know what does. But wait. If they're spending so much on welfare, where does all that tax money come from? Let me show you the French tax experience. If there's one thing France is world champion at, beating even Brazil in football, it's taxation. Let's go back to that HR office. Remember your €1,940 paycheck. To get that money into your bank account, a financial murder scene had to take place first. Here's how it works. If you're American, sit down. This might induce vertigo. A company wants to hire you for a decent mid-level job. They're willing to spend €60,000 per year on you. That's the super brute. The total cost to the employer. First, the government takes a massive bite called employer contributions. Poof. Gone. Now, your gross salary, the number on your contract, is about €43,000. But wait, you don't get €43,000. Now the government takes employee contributions, social security, retirement, unemployment, and more. Another huge bite. You're left with net salary roughly €33,000. But we aren't done. Now you have to pay income tax on that net salary. By the time money actually hits your pocket to buy groceries, nearly 50% of what your employer paid for your labor has vanished into state coffers. France has the highest tax burden in the OECD. The government confiscates about 45 to 48% of the entire country's GDP in taxes and social charges every year. This creates a vicious cycle of poverty. Companies can't afford high net salaries because the taxes on top are astronomical. Employees have no disposable income to spend. So the local economy stagnates. Government sees stagnation, says we need more money to fix this, and raises taxes. Again, it's an economic boa constrictor. Squeezing slowly. You don't realize you're suffocating until you try to save money at the end of the month and realize you can't. And God help you if you try to get rich. France has a cultural allergy to wealth. They literally had a solidarity tax on wealth. The ISF. For years that taxed you just for having assets, regardless of income. It scared away thousands of millionaires. Macron replaced it with a real estate wealth tax. But the message remains. Success is suspicious. Please apologize for it by giving us half. But here's where the math gets truly terrifying. Because all those taxes, they're funding a retirement system that's about to implode. You probably saw the news in 2023. Paris burning. Garbage piled high in the streets. Riot police charging through tear gas. War coup. The government proposed raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. To the rest of the world, it looked insane. Germany's retirement age is heading to 67. UK and US are similar. But in France, asking people to work 2 more years is treated like a human rights violation. Here's the dark reality those protesters didn't want to admit. The French pension system is a demographic Ponzi scheme. It's a pay-as-you-go system. That means the money taken from your paycheck today isn't being saved for your retirement. It's being wired directly to a retiree right now. You're paying for your grandma's vacation in Nice. This system works great when you have 4 workers for every 1 retiree. That was France in the 1960s. Today, roughly 1.7 workers for every 1 retiree. And dropping. France is getting old. Baby boomers are retiring en masse. The birth rate, while higher than the rest of Europe, isn't high enough to replace them. So you have a shrinking pool of young, underpaid workers. Remember, Smicardization. Trying to support a growing army of retirees living longer than ever. The math is brutal. It simply does not work. The system is bleeding billions of euros per year. The government has 2 choices. 1. Cut pensions equals political suicide. 2. Raise retirement age equals political suicide, but slightly slower. So, the country is stuck in a paralyzed state of denial. The young know they will probably never see their full pension, yet they're taxed to death to pay for the old. If you've made it this far, you're seeing the pattern. Every fix creates 2 new problems. It's intergenerational robbery, making the working population poorer every single day. And when the young realize the game is rigged, what do? They leave, walk into a Goldman Sachs office in London, a Google office in Zurich, a research lab in Montreal. Look at the badges. You'll see a shocking number of French names. France produces brilliant minds. The education system, specifically the elite grandes écoles, is fantastic at churning out world-class engineers, mathematicians, financiers. But France cannot keep them. This is brain drain, and it's bleeding the country dry of its most valuable resource, human capital. Imagine you're a top-tier AI researcher. Option A, stay in Paris. Earn 45,000 euros per year. Pay 50% in taxes. Struggle to rent a 30-square-meter apartment. Deal with sclerotic hierarchy where you wait 15 years for a promotion. Option B, move to California or Switzerland. Earn 150,000 euros per year. Pay lower taxes. Live in a house. Lead a team immediately. Not a hard choice. Estimates suggest 2.5 to 3 million French citizens live abroad. But this isn't a random sample. These are the risk takers, the entrepreneurs, the scientists. When the smartest people leave, innovation leaves with them. This is why there's no French Google, no French Amazon. Very few French tech giants have been created in the last 20 years. The founders left. They built Snowflake in the US. They built Moderna. CEO is French. In the US, France is effectively subsidizing the rest of the world. French taxpayers pay for the expensive education of these geniuses. Then the US or UK economy reaps the profits of their labor. It creates a country that feels stagnant. A country where ambition is capped. If you stay, you accept a ceiling. If you want to break through, buy a plane ticket. But wait, at least France still has its famous public services. Right. The free healthcare, the fast trains. Let me show you what's happening on the ground. But wait. You argue, at least they have free healthcare. At least the trains are fast. Here's the saddest part of the decline. The free stuff is breaking. For decades, the unspoken contract in France was, we take half your money, but we give you world-class services. That contract is void. Visit a French emergency room today. You might wait 10, 12, 20 hours. Medical deserts are spreading across rural France, areas where you cannot find a GP to save your life. Doctors are retiring. The numerous clauses kept the number of new doctors artificially low for decades. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground. Dr. Sophie Mercier is 62. She's the only GP serving 3 villages in rural Normandy. When she retires next year, 2,400 patients will have no doctor within 30 kilometers. The waiting list for a replacement: 7 years. This is what happens when the social contract voids. Sophie's story isn't unique. It's the new normal. The education system: French students used to be among the best in math. The latest PISA rankings: France has dropped to the middle of the pack. Inequality is skyrocketing. Teachers are underpaid and demoralized. There's a recruitment crisis where the government is hiring unqualified staff just to put warm bodies in classrooms. The justice system, notoriously slow and underfunded. Here's the tragedy. The French are still paying luxury prices, those high taxes, but receiving budget service. And when the public sector fails, those with money opt out. They send their kids to private schools. They go to private clinics. They use private security. This creates a two-tier society. The rich insulate themselves from the decline, while the poor and middle class are left with crumbling infrastructure. Égalité, carved on the front of every town hall, is starting to look less like a promise and more like a cruel joke. You'd think all this would make the French angry. And it does. But it's worse than anger. It's something far more corrosive. If economics is the hardware of a country, psychology is the software. And France's software is glitching. You might think the most pessimistic people in the world live in war zones or places with extreme poverty. You'd be wrong. Year after year, global polls, Beaver, Gallup, show that the French are the most pessimistic people on earth, often ranking lower than citizens of Iraq, Afghanistan, or Colombia when asked about their view of the future. This is a hidden tax on the French economy depression. Why is a country with 5-week paid vacations, the best cheese in the world, and high-speed trains so miserable? It comes down to the gap between expectation and reality. The French are raised on the myth of La Grande Nation. They grow up hearing about Napoleon, de Gaulle, the Enlightenment, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're told they're the center of the civilized world. But when they look out the window, they see a country shrinking in influence. They see their language being replaced by English or Globish. In business, they see their culture being Netflixized. It creates a collective cognitive dissonance. Like a fading aristocrat who still lives in a castle but can't afford to heat it. They wear velvet robes, but they're shivering. This pessimism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Consumers don't spend because they fear the future. Saving rates are unusually high. Entrepreneurs don't start businesses because failure is permanent. In France, bankruptcy is a social scarlet letter. Unlike in America where it's a badge of honor. Voters embrace radicalism because they feel the system is rigged against them. The psychological weight is perhaps the hardest thing to fix. You can change tax law in a week. You cannot change a national mood in a decade. France is currently trapped in a cycle of declinism, an obsession with its own decline that makes it almost impossible to rally the country for the painful reforms it actually needs. Now, before you sit back and laugh at the French from Chicago or London or Toronto, let me give you a warning. Before you sit back in your chair in Chicago, London, or Toronto and low at the French, let me give you a warning. France is not an anomaly. It's a time machine. France is showing you exactly what happens when a wealthy Western democracy runs out of road. It's the test case for a specific type of economic disease that's coming for everyone else. Look at the symptoms. First, aging population. France hit the demographic wall. First, the US is 10 years behind. Second, de-industrialization. France gutted its factories faster. But the American Rust Belt is telling the same story. Third, debt addiction. France's 113% debt to GDP is shocking. But the US is racing to catch up, running trillion-dollar deficits in peacetime. Fourth, political polarization. The collapse of centrist parties in France. The socialists and Republicans are basically dead. And the rise of extremes, Le Pen versus the far left, is a preview of the polarization tearing apart the US and UK. France is a laboratory. It's trying to maintain a 20th century standard of living with 21st century demographics and 19th century industrial thinking. And if France collapses, if the bond vigilantes finally attack French debt, if the EU has to bail out the second largest economy in Europe, this won't just be a French problem. It will be a global financial cataclysm. 2008. But with better wine and angrier rioters. So when you look at France, don't just see a poor country. See a warning flare. So, is France doomed? And more importantly, what does this mean for you? So is France doomed? Destined to become a sprawling open-air museum where tourists throw coins at the natives? Not necessarily. France has bounced back before. This is a country that survived the 100 Years' War, the Revolution, 2 World Wars, and occupation. There's a resilience in the French character, a stubbornness that shouldn't be underestimated. And there are signs of life. The tech scene in Paris, Station F, is growing. There's a generation of young French people who are tired of the old dogmas and want to work, build, disrupt. They're fighting against the gravity of the system. But the math is relentless. The debt is real. The aging is real. The poverty of the middle class is real. France is currently living on borrowed time and borrowed money. The illusion of wealth is maintained by debt. Social peace is maintained by spending money the state doesn't have. The question isn't if a correction is coming. The question is when. Many of you watching from London, Toronto, Sydney, you're seeing your own future. But here's the thing. Knowing this gives you an advantage. Now, I'm not a financial advisor. Everyone's situation is different. But here are 3 principles that have historically helped people navigate uncertain times. First, consider understanding your own country's trajectory. Where is it on the France timeline? The same forces are at work everywhere. Second, think about whether your assets are diversified. If you have all your savings in one currency, one country, one asset class, you may be more exposed than you realize. France's savers learned this the hard way. Third, consider developing portable skills. The brain drain isn't just a French phenomenon. It's a playbook for individual survival in a declining economy. This isn't about panic. It's about positioning. And for you, the lesson is simple. Don't let the postcard fool you. Don't let the luxury brands distract you. Most importantly, look at your own country's balance sheet. Because the French disease is contagious. And you might already be infected.